Welcome to my channel. Before we begin, turn off the lights if you want to feel it closer. This is not a campfire tale to laugh about, it's a mood that clings to your throat and lingers past sunrise. Now listen. You're about to hear how a fog changed everything it touched. The fog that leaves hunger. The fog came on an autumn night, slow as a well-rehearsed lie. It gathered over the river just before dusk and crawled into Everswell with a kind of deliberate slowness. At first, people treated it like any other mist. Damp on the coat, halos around street lamps, a nuisance for drivers. It didn't stay a nuisance for long. It carried something. The first sign was the dogs going missing. It wasn't a one-off. Over a week, pets that had been chasing balls and yipping at fences vanished. Owners found leashes snagged on porches, full bowls left uneaten, doors standing unlocked as if the animals had simply gone out and never come back. Neighbors whispered about it for days, until the second sign made disbelief split into fear. They found the first body on a Sunday, down by the river, where the reeds never quite dried. Marcus, a nighttime delivery driver, lay on his side with his mouth half open and his eyes fixed in a blank stare. His shirt was torn at the torso. The skin around his mouth shone with a dark residue that didn't look like ordinary blood. In the mud nearby, footprints started normal, and then dissolved into smears, like skin no longer clinging to the sole. The coroner said bluntly what he saw. Something had worked on Marcus's throat and belly. But there weren't the big missing chunks you'd expect. Instead, there was a different pattern, as if flesh had been eaten in thin strips and scraped away until the surface was raw and glossy. The river cameras, which normally caught late anglers and occasional teens, showed no person on the path, only a dense, lowering fog moving like an animal without an owner. Then came the dreams. Not everybody had them, but enough people did that the town sat up and paid attention. The dreams were always the same. A hollow ache, a sound of tearing like teeth on something tough, and hands pulling apart meat as if peeling honeyed bread. An older woman dreamed her little girl opened the fridge to find something in it with many tiny mouths. She woke clawing at the sheets. A teenage boy who worked at the corner store stopped joking and stared at night with eyes that seemed lit from the inside by a hunger that wasn't his. By then, most understood that whatever had come with the fog didn't simply take things, it changed people. A pattern emerged. Contact with the mist preceded symptoms by hours or days. There was an altered palate, a pressure at the throat, making the air taste like old meat, a compulsive need to tear and chew. The town started calling it the hunger, because a name, however crude, made fear easier to pass around. The church opened its doors. Pastor Thompson held vigils. People clasped hands, recited psalms, shared stale bread. But hunger doesn't respect prayer. Halfway through a hymn, some worshipers began to tremble. Others got up and walked toward the walls with blank eyes, following an odor only they could sense. On a beam over the altar, they later found clean, gleaming marks, tiny grooves, as if teeth had tested the wood. Scientists and police tried rational explanations. Air samples revealed organic compounds that mimicked the scent of decaying protein. But the chemistry didn't explain the selectivity. Not everyone exposed to the fog experienced the same symptoms. Some vomited, others chewed at fabric or leaves, and a terrifying few went after warm human flesh. Authorities urged calm. More patrols, curfews, radio advisories. You can't lock the night away though, or what it brings. Early cannibalism incidents were dismissed as freak acts. A man in a packing shed devouring cuts from a lorry. A woman biting her husband's hand until it was nearly gone until the next moon. Such stories were no longer rare. Reports multiplied. Cheek wounds, kitchen attacks, groups gathering in basements to feed on whatever they could find, from roadkill to pet food. Whispered rumors told of people peeling their own skin to taste it, not to kill but driven by an urge to feel something closer, more immediate. They drank less. The afflicted could go days without thirst and still ravenously seek meat. It was as if their bodies had rewired desire. Doctors, exhausted and short on answers, described strange hormonal spikes, adrenal surges, and serotonin shifts that made little sense. Some called it a toxin that rewired reward and pain centers. Others, quieter and alarmed, spoke of an invader. The fog carried something that nested in the brain. Everswell split between barricaders and those who tried to flee. Roadways out became walls of mist, cars stalled with headlights dull, engines coughing. A few who tried to walk through never returned. Those who stayed bolted doors with boards, blankets, anything that might stop the mist's fingers. Nothing could keep the breath of fog from finding the smallest seam. Midway through the second week, the fog changed tactics. It began to shape itself. When the wind lay still, the mist rose in tentative human silhouettes, suggestions of figures that dissolved into reaching arms aimed at windows and doorknobs. It was not a trick of light. The shapes blinked and mimicked movements of those watching from inside. Behind curtains, residents said the figures would drag a palm over glass, like a starving guest. Testing warmth. At night, the sleepless heard wet, smearing sounds against panes, as if meat were tasting the cold. They tried to fight back. Bonfires ringed the river. Lanterns burned through the night. People patrolled with bats and makeshift spears. For one night it worked, the fog thinned. The air felt safer. The vigil holders laughed with relief, until a boy stepped out of the shadows, mud on his pants and a sheen at the corner of his mouth. He swore he had seen a table in the fog, a long plank of wood, empty plates, and dozens of hands reaching. He spoke in fits. His eyes were hollow and tracked something only he could see. What horrified people most was how the hunger learned. What began as random impulse took on script. Sufferers sought particular meats, foods tied to their histories. The butcher didn't leap at his wife. He went to the old woman who'd raised him, forced open her basement, tore meat from a curing ham, and ate as if in ritual. The acts weren't mindless. They were precise. The afflicted often seemed to retain fragments of choice. The eyes, when you met them during an episode, held a terrible focus. They knew what they were doing and could not stop. Explanations diverged. Some argued the fog released buried desires and people enacted self-annihilation symbolically. Others said the mist implanted cravings, an infection that sowed its own commands. Fear hunched the town old against young, neighbor against neighbor. Even the radio host sounded different, voices caught in longer breaths. The music of the early hours tasted like industrial sorrow. In the Doyle house, a small resistance took shape. Alice Doyle, eldest sibling, stepped forward when her little brother Peter changed. Peter had been touched by the mist, chasing a ball in the park. He returned with mud on his shirt and a hollow silence. He licked chair edges, chewed cushion seams, fished chunks of meat from soup, with shaking hands like a man rediscovering treasure. Alice, torn between fury and love, refused to lose him. She noticed, painfully, that the fog attacked not the will so much as the personal ledger. Photographs, heirlooms, memory. Alice watched patterns obsessively. She tracked the times the mist thickened, how it found creative ways in, what sorts of objects it favored. She discovered, with a chill that never left, that homes heavy with memory photo walls, old coats, the lingering scent of perfume were prime targets. It was as though the fog fed on resonance, the echo of past joys and sorrows. Alice formed a desperate theory. If the mist devoured hunger tied to memory, maybe erasing or neutralizing memories would starve it. She tried it in ways that looked foolish and, in the end, desperate. She burned photos in the fireplace, smashed picture frames, left letters on the compost heap. They boxed and buried the things that smelled of family, teddy bears, a father's jacket, the trophy Peter had won. When the mist came that night, the house shuddered, but Peter held. He mumbled, scratched at wood, but he didn't attack. For a while, Alice thought they'd bought themselves a reprieve. The fog, however, was not easily fooled. Burning memory made a new food for the fog: absence. The smoke and ash fed it as effectively as photographs had. In the Doyle basement, the grandmother, long, lucid, and quiet, one night went out to the shed and started clawing in the earth, as if unearthing something only she could sense. When they stopped her hands were caked with soil and a dark residue, and her mouth tasted of the same metallic tang found on Marcus. That night they learned that erasing memory could open other, worse doors. Horror accrued like sediment. It wasn't only what people did, but what began to appear: meals left on dressers, bite marks on picture frames, the sense that each home's past had become edible. Those who tried to be gentle and keep their memories safe found themselves prey to a force that turned intimacy into knife. By the third month, Everswell was cleaved. Fortified houses, empty ones, groups camped in school gyms with hastily scrawled keep out signs, streets lined with jars and dirty dishes. Supplies ran low, and electricity flickered. When the lights went, the mist advanced. Survivors whispered of a ritual or bargain. Feed the fog. Maybe it will leave the rest alone. Some advocated putting meat on the square. Bait the mist. Study it. Others suggested sealing memories away like hazardous waste, bury a life in crates. Science and superstition bared teeth at each other. There was news of Hallows End across the county, another town the fog had visited months earlier. Hallows End had quieted, local survivors said, but it was a hollowness like frost. Houses preserved, meals left on tables. People who moved through rooms like sleepwalkers. A small investigative party from Everswell, including Alice, went to learn if Hallows End had an answer. They drove through a damp morning and found a town arrested. Porches were tidy. Plates on tables showed half-eaten dinners placed with odd care, as if someone left and never returned. In a kitchen, someone sat rocking and staring. A child fed himself the heel of a boot with an appetite that made the strangers' stomachs turn. They couldn't tell if Hallows End had found a way to live with the fog, or if the people had simply surrendered. An old man there told them what he could. The fog had left when the meat offered it had no memory. Hallows End had stripped their lives of links to the past, photos gone, letters burned, items replaced by anonymous goods. They fed the mist sterile meat, boxed cuts, packaged produce, animals with no human story. The fog, he said, moved on when the town no longer tasted history. Alice and the group returned with a choice. One strategy existed. Yes, but it demanded moral transactions many could not stomach. Cease to be who you are, or lose loved ones to their hungers. Debate in Everswell was ugly. Some started preparing sacrifices, wrapped packs of meat, anonymous crates left in the square. Wagons became ashamed with their loads. Others refused, determined not to hand over their past. On the night the fog tasted intent, it stayed low on the horizon, fingers licking at houses like a thief testing doors. Faces formed in it, shifting and unfinished. And the mist began to point. It singled out homes that clung to memory. A wedding photo on a mantle, a baby's cradle, a wall full of clippings and plaques. The fog seemed to have preferences now. People either put meat on the square or watched their histories get chosen for them. Sacrifices worked briefly. A family left wrapped chicken. The fog slurped it up with a wet sound, and the town slept without nightmares for a night. The bargain was cheap and quick, and for a while the square's smorgasbord held the beast's attention. But hunger adapted. When the fog no longer found enough anonymous cuts, it started to aim directly for what people refused to give. Alice organized what felt like tactical theft. She and others took heirlooms from those unwilling to part with them and transported them to the square under cover of night. They became curators of exile, carrying strangers' memories like contraband. She watched Peter in the back of the van, eyes blank, saliva like varnish on his lip. For a moment he looked at her, and the recognition was a wound. They left the bundles, one by one. The fog swallowed them with noise like wet paper tearing. The town got quiet again. Alice slept and woke to a house that felt lighter, less crowded by ghosts. She looked at the wall where her mother's photograph had hung and found only the ghost of a frame. Trying to call the face to mind felt like catching mist in cupped hands. The details slid away. Peace came with a price. Everswell traded nights of safety for a slow erosion of memory. Names on tombstones blurred for the living. Stories repeated themselves as stripped down scripts. Those whose histories the fog had taken were different, colder, more efficient, less human in ways that made neighbors uneasy. The fog favored hearts that still remembered. Those who had offered up their lives' markers were left paler, useful. Alice eventually noticed something else. Every time the square was fed, the fog thickened, changing texture into something almost solid. On certain mornings she could smell salt and fat as if from an oven. At the edges, shapes emerged, small mouths, fingers, pebbled eyes that blinked. The fog was not only devouring memory, it was learning to accumulate it, to make a body of collected hunger. Don Halverson, the mechanic who'd helped load the first sacrifices, vanished one dawn. His truck returned empty. People said he left in shame. Others whispered the fog had begun to demand more than anonymous meat. Those who had helped with the offering started disappearing at greater rates than others. Their houses showed the lick marks of mist on picture frames. Some never woke. The fog had been taught what human textures tasted like, and now it wanted them. The last terrible night centered on a house 2 streets from the square. It wasn't dramatic in any cinematic way. It was intimate and ordinary. Mrs. Rears, Hale refused to relinquish her husband's photograph, the only remnant of a man who died in a war when their daughter was an infant. The town pleaded with her. The community begged. She refused, saying she would rather starve herself than give the one thing that kept him alive. The fog, which had been honing a language of hunger, answered with patience. It molded a figure beside the Hale home that echoed the man in the photograph. It stood in the yard, hands together, chin up, and tapped at the window with the insistence of a guest who won't leave. The little girl woke and asked, sleep-bleary, "Is the man outside? Can I give him my doll?" Her mother hugged her and opened a box. She placed the photograph on the kitchen table. The mist took it slow, ceremonial. As the picture sank into the fog, the face in the print faded like ink in bathwater. The woman was found at dawn, empty-eyed and broken, the child asleep in her lap with the doll's cloth chewed. The photograph was gone, and with it neighbors swore the nightly laugh that had haunted the house. The mother sometimes groped at the air where the fabric of a uniform should be. Once, in frustration, she clamped a neighbor's arm hard enough to bruise. The town's survival became a ledger of small betrayals. They kept the lights on, kept the kids in school, but the days tasted flat. The fog moved on in time, searching for other towns that still held history in their walls. Sometimes on river nights, a low mist rolled in, and someone swore they heard their name whispered, or the faint crack of a frame being licked. Alice lived with parts of herself missing. She taught her son to bolt windows, to avoid the first strands of fog, to cherish photos while knowing their weight. She told him to remember his grandfather with affection, but not to let memory become bait. She knew the line between protection and surrender, and it was thin. Years later, the story of Everswell became a cautionary tale told in different ways. Some people embellished the violence for thrill, others kept it austere. Tourists bought postcards of the bridge, not knowing that behind certain boarded windows lay basements with sealed boxes. The fog remained an ambiguous presence, an outside thing that fed on intimacy, yes, but also a mirror that exposed how people behave when survival and history collide. The fog had learned to ask in human language, "Give me the faces, give me the past." The town, in turn, learned how costly peace can be. They survived, not entirely whole, stitched together with choices that were sometimes brave, sometimes cowardly. That was all it took to keep the town standing. Thank you for listening. If you like this story and want more like it, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and leave a comment telling me which part unsettled you the most. It helps a lot. See you next dark night.